And Jesus knew that we would need help. Jesus knew that we would need help. And so in John 14, verse 16, he said, I'm going to ask the Father, and he's going to give you, and this is for every single believer, he's going to give you another helper that he may be with you forever. Can't you just see the Holy Spirit going, I said forgive him, now let it go, forgive him. Let it go. I said you're supposed to love him, let it go. I will ask the Father, and he will give you another helper that he may be with you forever. And that is the Spirit of truth, which is the Holy Spirit, whom the world cannot receive because it does not see him. We're not talking about see in a physical form. That word see means to understand, to perceive, to realize what's going on. The world doesn't understand, it doesn't perceive the Holy Spirit or know him, but you know him because he abides with you and he will be in you. God living in us. Now does that mean that you're just going to get a little part of him, or do you get access to all of him? And you know the answer to that. The answer to that is that we get access to all of the Holy Spirit. We may not actually access all of the Holy Spirit, but we have access to the whole Holy Spirit. You got all of the Holy Spirit. Every believer has full access to the Holy Spirit. Some believers are grieving the Holy Spirit. You remember Ephesians 4:30, it says, grieve not the Holy Spirit who sealed you for the day of redemption. Well, if we're grieving the Holy Spirit, then he's not going to be able to do a supernatural work in us. If we're not forgiving people, he's not going to be able to do a supernatural work. If we're not loving people, he's not going to be able to do that supernatural work. But every believer has God living in him or her. Think about that. God is living inside of you. God is living inside of you and me, every believer. In Romans chapter 8, verse 9, Paul emphasized this, but if anyone does not have the Spirit of Christ, he does not belong to him. So you either have the Spirit, you're saved and you have the Spirit, or you're not saved and you don't have the Spirit. There's no middle ground here. So you have the Holy Spirit. So what does the Holy Spirit look like in us? What was our very first example that the Bible gives us of what it looks like when the Holy Spirit comes to live inside of us? And you know it's in Acts chapter 2. Acts chapter 2, verse 1, and when the day of Pentecost had come, they were all together in one place, and suddenly there came from heaven a noise like a violent rushing wind, and it filled the whole house where they were sitting. And there appeared to them tongues as of fire distributing themselves, and they rested on each one of them. On each one of them. Not the Pentecostal ones that were in the upper room, and it wasn't the Southern Baptist ones that were in the upper room. It was on every single person that was in the upper room. In verse 4, and they were all filled. How many of them were filled? They were all filled with the Holy Spirit, and they began to speak with other tongues. When you look up that word tongues, what does it mean? This is a definition that really helped me with speaking in tongues. It means unintelligible, ecstatic utterance. An unintelligible, ecstatic. I know people who speak in tongues even though they're speaking English. They're speaking unintelligible utterances. But that's what speaking in tongues is. It's just making a sound. And you've all spoken in tongues just about all of your life since you were 2 years old. Come on, sing it with me. Deck the halls with boughs of holly. Fa la 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 la. And what does that mean? It means nothing. You were just speaking a noise. You were making a noise. It means absolutely nothing. It meant the songwriter couldn't think of what words to put in there. That's what it really meant. So as they were all filled with the Holy Spirit, and they began to speak with other tongues as the Spirit was giving them utterance. So it's for every single one of them. Do you have the Holy Spirit? Yes. Is speaking in tongues for you? Yes. And you say, well, wait a minute now. People understood this, and it was in a language that people could understand. Let's talk about it. Acts chapter 2, verse 6. And when the sound occurred, the crowd came together, And they were bewildered because each one of them was hearing them speak in his own language. I'll tell you what was happening there. A miracle was happening. And those people that the Holy Spirit wanted to hear the message were hearing the message in their own tongue. But that wasn't true for everybody. Some didn't. In verse 13, but others were mocking and saying, they're full of sweet wine. They're drunk. So everybody didn't understand. Even though they may have spoke the same language that other person was speaking. Everybody did not understand. For most of the people there, it was an unintelligible utterance. Well, Peter explained. Everybody's saying, these guys are drunk. Peter stood up to speak in verse 15. These men are not drunk, as you suppose, for it is only the third hour of the day. But this is what was spoken of through the prophet Joel. And it shall be in the last days, God says, that I will pour forth of my Spirit on all mankind, on every single person. And your sons and your daughters shall prophesy, and your young men shall see visions, and your old men shall dream dreams.